Good afternoon. We have come together for the purpose of dedication. And we must understand, first of all, that while it is done, can't be done, that is, the dedication of a building, the dedication of an edifice. You read of such things in the newspapers as being done, but they never are. Somebody is entertaining a false sense of the realities, because an edifice is a dead structure. It has no life, it has no being, it has no consciousness, it has nothing. It is an empty vehicle. And it never can be anything but an instrument, something to be used. To be rightly used, there must be a dedicated consciousness. When there is no dedicated consciousness, the building can become what so many buildings are. Whether it is a city hall, a state capitol, a national capitol, hall of Congress, we like to think them as being holy, but they aren't. And very often they serve unholy purposes in spite of the fact that they have been dedicated. The answer is they never have been dedicated because it isn't possible to dedicate a corpse. And an edifice is only a corpse until it is governed by a consciousness. And if the consciousness is dedicated, the building, the edifice, serves the purpose for which it was intended. And in the very moment when that same building is no longer governed by a dedicated or consecrated consciousness, the building no longer serves that purpose. And so it is that as you look at this particular edifice, which is devoted to the presentation of the message of the infinite ray, just remember this, that this edifice will never be anything more than the state of dedication and consecration of the leader and those who come for study. Consciousness can be dedicated. On the human plane, well, first of all, there are two kinds of people on earth, the living and the walking dead. And the living are those who, in some measure, have dedicated themselves to some purpose. There are those who have dedicated themselves to the marvelous causes of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and YMCA and YWCA, and others have dedicated themselves to nursing, medicine, the ministry. And those who have dedicated themselves to something are living. They're drawing forth life from the source. The others, the walking dead, are not drawing forth life or inspiration from anything. They are living the animal life, the vegetable life, just drawing forth whatever life is to be found in the air or food, an animal form of life. No one lives really until they have found something greater than themselves, something to which they want to devote themselves, consecrate themselves, dedicate themselves. And then they begin to live. Men have really lived who originally met together to place a Bible in every hotel room in the world. And every one of the men that joined in that enterprise were living men who found a purpose in life and drew forth from life some wonderful good. We then can dedicate ourselves, consecrate ourselves to a purpose, and when we do, everything that we touch takes on the nature of sacredness. Then you can say that the very walls send forth a healing grace. The stones, the floor, the ceiling, everything is imbued. But imbued with what? Imbued with the consciousness of those who participate in the activity. They are not endowed from anything out in the air or up in the sky or down below. They are dedicated only by the state of consciousness within the edifice. Therefore, when individuals unite to produce an edifice that is to be devoted to a spiritual subject, you may be assured of this, that the edifice, is going to show forth the nature of their dedication, those who have participated in it. If we find in the building, in the rooms, beauty or harmony or healing or comfort, it isn't from the room, and it isn't from the furniture, and it isn't from the colors or the combination of colors. It is from the consciousness of those who have united to produce this effect. So it is, if an edifice of this nature is to serve its purpose, those who participate must not look to the infinite way for their blessing, but to the consciousness of the individuals who participate in the activity of the infinite way, for that is where the blessing is to be found. It is not to be found in its books, it is not to be found in its tapes, it is to be found in the consciousness of those who have produced these. It is for this reason that those who become active in a work of this nature, any spiritual work, must understand the need for fitting preparation of consciousness. In other words, we give forth no more to our activity, to our students, to our patients. We give forth no more than what our consciousness is. And if we allow our consciousness to be burdened with human affairs, if we allow our consciousness to be penetrated with the appetites of this world, then of course we have that much less to give. Now remember that I do not mean refrain from the activities of this world, because above all things this message demands that we remain in the world, that we participate in all of the activities of the world, the business activities, artistic, natural, commercial, political, because we bring to these the higher dedication of our soul. And in the end, if business is to be conducted on a higher plane, art, industry, government, it will only be because introduced into the strata of society is the consciousness of those who are dedicated, doing unto others as we would have others do unto us, loving our neighbor as ourselves. None of this can be accomplished without introducing a spiritual note. No one can introduce a spiritual note except someone dedicated to the Spirit. Now, at first, we undertake an activity of this nature for some reason peculiar to the individual. Each one enters a work of this kind for a different reason. Some are forced into it against their will. Others enter it very willingly and very gladly. Others enter it prematurely. Each one has some reason that places him into it, but the main point is this: they're not going to remain in it, and they're not going to be successful in it, except in proportion as they learn how to open their consciousness to the inflow of the Spirit and make this a matter of praying without ceasing. Not just a morning period before starting out, or a morning and evening, but one of continuous dedication to a spiritual purpose. The question that immediately arises is this: if this is true, why are we not more dedicated than we are, or why are there not more people of dedicated consciousness? And the answer is this: dedication comes as a grace of God. No one can seek it. They may desire it, but that's as far as they can go. No one can strive or struggle for it because it isn't won that way. It comes as a grace, and that grace comes with our preparation. So with each one of us, we have periods in which we are so devoted to our business activities or art or profession, and we are so busy raising families that the cultural side of life comes second, and the spiritual side of life comes third. For this reason, most people come to a spiritual way of life rarely before middle age. Usually by the time the children have grown up, or the business has gotten on its feet, or the profession is established. Now, we are coming into another age in which we start with the children before they're born and lead them into the spiritual life. And the reason is that by now there are enough grandparents and parents in this nation ready to include the spiritual life as a part of their daily life. In past generations it has been very much neglected, not only here but in other parts of the world. But until we bring the spiritual factors of life into our experience, we are not the whole man. Now, it is only a few generations ago that we had only physical men. The mental side of man was practically unknown, with the exception of a few artists and writers. The mental side of man was almost unknown. He was a physical being. And then a few decades ago, we began to understand the nature of the mind, and we entered into a more mental period of life. And from then on, we have had this whole era of inventions, science, discoveries, all of which come out of the mental realm. Then we had to pass from that, not leaving it behind, remember, but going a step further into the spiritual, because you do not have man until you have a soul, a mind, and a body. In the way the human life has been lived, we started with a physical man, a physical baby, and we tried to instill something of the mind into them, something of discipline, art, science, culture, music. And we left the child to find his own way spiritually. We may have sent him to a church, but that had nothing to do with his spiritual development, as he soon found out. Now we understand that man is threefold. There isn't any question about it that man has a body, and there isn't any question about it that man has a mind. But now we know something further. We know the nature of man, and that is neither body nor mind. Man is really soul. The soul is the man, and the mind is an instrument that the man uses, and the body is another instrument that the man uses. And when the soul is awakened to its spiritual capacities, it uses the mind for clean, intelligent purposes, and it uses the body for clean, intelligent purposes and healthful purposes. When there is an absence of the soul, when there is an absence of a spiritual sense in man, you have only a mind and body. And that mind and body can just as well be dedicated to evil as it can be to good. It can be dedicated to bad power as well as to good power, but not when the soul has been awakened, not when the soul has been realized, not when the spirit is opened. Then man loses the capacity to be bad. He loses the capacity to use his mind or body for erroneous purposes. He has no choice. Sometimes it is thought that man has a choice as to be good or evil, or to be spiritual or not spiritual, but he has no such choice. As long as his soul faculties aren't awakened, he has got to live in the realm of mind and body, and it can be bad or good, or a combination of bad and good. But once the spirit is awakened, once one has received the tiniest bit of dedication, the mind becomes a purer instrument, the body becomes a purer instrument, and as we will discover, we will be enabled to use mind and body unto a far greater age than our past generations. It is necessary for us to make a choice whether or not the goal is worth striving for. Because if we decide the goal is worth striving for, we will make some effort toward a dedication or consecration that will lead us to the eventual point to which we must come. And that is to where we realize the futility of our own dedication and devotion and consecration, and realize that unless we have been dedicated by God, all of our self-dedication is going to come to a very quick end. However, it is a step that each one of us has to take. We have to make the decision to be worthy. We have to make the decision to try to practice principles. We have to make the decision to remember consciously. And then as time goes on, it gives the opportunity, it provides the preparation for the entrance of God. And now that brings us to an essential point of our particular work in this message. It starts with the master statement, I stand at the door and knock. First of all, we have to put the book away, even the Bible, and ask ourselves what this means. I stand at the door and knock. It has no reference to Jesus because he was crucified 2,000 years ago, and according to the reports, he ascended on a cloud and went out of sight, and he hasn't been seen since. And yet, there it stands for all time, I stand at the door and knock. Well, we have discovered that whenever the Master spoke of I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have life more abundantly. I am the bread, the meat, the wine, the water. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. Whenever he spoke of I in that sentence, he was speaking of the Christ, the Spirit, the soul of man, the spiritual essence of being. And therefore, this statement really means that my soul, my purified self, not purified self, no, my pure self, that which was never impure, that part of me which is really divine, the I of me, the soul of me, from before my birth, this spiritual presence and power was standing here at the door of my consciousness, seeking entrance through ignorance, spiritual ignorance, religious ignorance. We didn't know that. Therefore, we lived out here in our lives with whatever occupied us. We went through some very nice experiences. We went through some very bad ones. We went through some very rich ones and very poor ones, very pure ones and very sinful ones. And all the time we could have avoided it all and had nothing but heaven on earth. But no one told us that the soul of man, God is the soul of man. And this soul of man, his own soul, is always standing at the very door of his consciousness, knocking for entrance into the mind and body, trying to take us over and live our lives, to bring us to the place that Paul came when he said, I live yet not I, Christ liveth my life. And this same Christ, or Son of God, the same Spirit or soul, is waiting to take over our lives and govern it and make the crooked places straight, go before us to prepare mansions for us. But we don't know that. We haven't been taught that. And so we struggle. But now through spiritual revelation, we know that I do stand at the door of your consciousness and knock. I, your soul, your divine self, is knocking at the door of your mind, seeking entrance, to take over the government of your mind, to consecrate your mind to itself, to its uses instead of to your uses, to consecrate your body to its uses, not to your pleasures, to take over your home, your residence, your business office, and consecrate it to its purpose. Ah, if you could only know what a new sense of life this awakens in us. Once we know that my body is the temple of the living God, therefore my body should not be at my disposal for my particular use, but should every day be dedicated to God for God's use. My home should not be my palace. My home every day should be turned over to God, that God may take that home and use it for God's purpose. My talents, whatever they may be, came forth from God. One has an artistic talent, one has a scientific talent, an inventive talent, another has an industrial, a commercial talent, a money talent, a government talent. But the difference that comes into a person's life when they turn their talent back to God and their home and their mind and their body and let God dedicate it to God's own use, that I may be a fitting instrument for the divine. Now, life becomes something entirely different, because I begin to perceive, even if it's only through a glass darkly at first, I begin to perceive that there is a purpose in life of which I had no knowledge. And each day have a period of meditation in which we open our consciousness to let God come in and dedicate the mind and body and business and building to God's purpose, and then watch how with time the nature of our business changes, the nature of our use of telephone changes, the nature of our use of the automobile changes. And we'll soon see that all of these really are divinely authorized. So, in the conduct of our spiritual ministry, let us remember that dedication and consecration are two very important words. But let us not think of ourselves as being dedicated or consecrated. Let us think of ourselves as instruments through which God's dedication and consecration is made manifest on earth. Let us not think for a moment that we can dedicate or consecrate this building. But each day let us open our consciousness that God may consecrate and dedicate this building. And then you'll find that there will be an invisible sign outside the door, thus far and no further. And that will be to the carnal mind. When it sees that sign, as it will, or feel it if it tries to get through, it can't get through. It just cannot get through, because God has ordained this edifice unto himself, has consecrated and dedicated it unto his use. And no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, if and when thee has surrendered thyself to God's dedication. You must remember that in the 91st Psalm, it did not say that these evil things will not come nigh the dwelling place of everybody. Only those who are dedicated, consecrated, who live in the spiritual place of the Most High. And the Master, in the 15th chapter of John, did not say that God is going to bless all of you and that God is going to prosper all of you. He never said this at all. He said, if you abide in me and let my words abide in you, then you will bear fruit richly. In other words, when you permit God's dedication to take over your mind and your body. And remember several times a day that the mind and the body are really to serve as God's instruments. You'll find that we ourselves will make less use of the mind and body, and God will make more use of these. So too, we do not make a place holy. We do not make a building holy. But by opening our consciousness, we let God in, and then God makes it holy.